Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining me. Um, as January has already shown us, 2025 is just going to be a hell of a year. And I think looking at the astrology of the year and really diving deep into what the symbols are telling us and what the positive potential that may come out of some of the crises that we're seeing around the world right now, how that's going to play out. And what are the potential golden opportunities that lie beyond whatever challenges any of us might be facing. 2025 is going to be just an absolutely critical inflection point for every single one of us in some way, shape, or form, and for the world as well. And I'm not being sensational when I say that I think this is one of the most critical moments in human history that most of us will live through. This is an important inflection point for our local communities, for the states we live in, for the countries we live in, and for the global network as a whole. In January, I announced a 2025 guidebook that I had written to help astrology lovers like you navigate the year ahead month by month with more awareness and more consciousness of the themes that might be coming up at a given time. This guidebook, there's a separate one written for every single zodiac sign. And so that guidebook would be a great addition to this video if you don't already have it, because this video is quite general, while that guidebook will take these general themes and let you know where the alignments we're discussing and highlighting in this video are falling in your natal chart. And so you'll know a little bit more specifically what to expect in your personal life and what areas of life might be up for review and important change this year. In any event, I think this video is going to put a lot of context around the things that we're seeing on the news, maybe what we or some of our loved ones have been going through. So I really think it's worth your time to tune in to the video all the way through. If you would like to get a copy of the guidebook, I'm going to try to pin a link in the comments below this video, or you can visit the landing page on my website, which is www.thecosmicgemguidebook.com. For those of you who know me, you may remember that my September newsletter pointed out that the astrology of this entire decade signaled really a mind-blowing level of crisis and change. 2020 through 2028 specifically bring extremely rare alignments that historically coincide with changes in how societies function individually and internally, and also how those societies function together collectively as a whole. In addition to that, some of the cosmic patterns we see this year are just totally unprecedented in written history. And astrologers use history and rely on history to go back and say, this is what happened the last couple of times these alignments happened, so this is what we can expect now. And I don't even think astrologers in our wildest imaginations at this point can predict exactly what's going to happen this year and even next. I think the way that we live and human consciousness is about to change in ways that, again, we cannot imagine. I think when we look back 10 or 20 years from now, we're not going to remember the pandemic. We're going to look back at 2025 and 2026 and say, that's when everything really changed. Without overloading you with too many details and every astrological rarity that we have coming this year, I think sharing just a few facts with you will help you appreciate the gravity of where we stand in this moment in time. The slowest moving planets in our astrological system are Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn changes signs every 2.5 years. Uranus changes sign every 8 years. Neptune changes sign every 14 years. And on average, Pluto will change sign around every 21 years. Currently, and in little over 1 year, every single one of these planets goes through a sign change almost simultaneously. The mathematical odds of that are impressive to just standing alone, but there's so much more going on in addition to that. Saturn and Neptune can join every 36 years. But when they do that in 2025 and 2026, those planets are going to be meeting up at the seminal degree of our 360-degree zodiac. Saturn and Neptune will align perfectly in February of 2026 at 0 degrees Aries. That is the very first degree of our entire zodiac. It is the symbolic birth point for consciousness itself. It is the gateway between the spirit realm, or the primordial soup, if you will, and physical material life on the other. Never in written history have those planets come together at that seminal point in the sky. The mathematical odds of that are about 1 in every 13,000 years. And I think the symbolism of that is just an incredible omen about what we have coming. And yet again, that's not all that's happening. In August of this year, all of these outer planets will come into a favorable alignment with one another, creating a mutually supportive configuration that's just as rare as everything I've mentioned so far. And I think this gives me a lot of hope and faith that there are going to be really productive opportunities that come through some of the harder moments that we might have to face this year. And it just, without a doubt, there is no question that this year and next year are powerfully propelling us into a completely new era of life and human existence. I think a lot of us have been waiting for some old normality to return since 2020, but the astrology suggested way back when that 2020 was nothing more than an instigator. The pandemic was nothing more than the trigger that got a ball rolling, and was really just leading us towards an even greater paradigm shift than we've ever seen. Years from now, I think we're all going to look back and see why things happened exactly as they did, why this thing had to happen so that the next thing could happen and the next thing could happen. And we're weaving a story right now that we don't really know the long-term effects of, but that are going to be very, very important. And so I think it's important that we understand what's happening and we stay present for that. We give ourselves a lot of grace as we're going through that process. And I think the astrology is just the most brilliant way we can do that. And I'm so thankful I have the astrology at my fingertips. You know, we have to repeatedly assure ourselves throughout this whole year that we as a collective, and you in your own life, are again in the midst of a pivot point that will make sense in the long run. And I just want to assure you of that, and hope that you will use this video and whatever other tools are at your disposal to power through the year ahead and love yourself through the year ahead. For those of you with a deeper understanding of astrology, you know that there is really no way for astrologers to predict the exact situations and circumstances that are coming. That's not really how astrology works. Astrology is not concretely predictive. It is archetypally predictive, and it allows us to forecast within a spectrum of potential outcomes. You know, the goal of astrology is not giving us a false sense of certainty or security about the future, but astrology can help us move through what's coming and remind us that we're in the right place, and that anything that looks messy or chaotic on the surface momentarily makes total sense in the grand scheme of things and is in accordance with some larger divine plan. Richard Tarnas, who is probably one of the greatest astrologers and historians of our time, articulated our goal with astrology really well in his book, Cosmos and Psyche. And in that book, he said this. He said, the natural human tendency is to want to know that the general outlook for the foreseeable future is uniformly positive and will only get better with blue skies as far as the eyes can see. Yet there are advantages to knowing a potential challenging reality in advance, facing it squarely, recognizing its signs, its dangers, and its positive potential. Perhaps equally important, it can be psychologically centering and spiritually fortifying to recognize that such periods represent the unfolding of larger cycles of development and human evolution in a context that is subtly ordered and intelligible rather than random and meaningless. I think all of us would like to know that 2025 is going to be just an easy, remarkable, fun year because I think we all really need that and want that so badly right now. But we're getting there, guys, and we're going to be rounding the corner of all of this heavy energy soon. And I want to show you the timeline for that and explain it in this video. And the truth of it is that while we do have some potentially challenging alignments this year, no combination of planets is totally desirable and will bring only good outcomes. And no planetary alignment is all bad or all negative. In my experience, both in my own life and in coaching clients, I always see that every alignment brings both positive outcomes and some challenges. And I think we're going to get a little bit of both of these this year. And I will give you some very explicit examples of the categories those events might fall into. Since we have our three outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, shifting from feminine or yin signs this year into masculine or yang signs, I think we are going to start to leave behind a sort of approach to life that's more defensive or reactive to what's happening. I think we're entering a period of time where we are empowered to be more offensive, right? And make the changes we wish to see in the world. And instead of having to kind of like defend and react. And I think that that will bring us a lot of opportunity. And I like to see the astrological weather give us that sort of support because, again, I think we've all been needing it. I think this year, at least certain parts of this year, but especially next year, we're going to feel like we're waking up from some like weird midday nap and getting our power back and getting our inspiration back, getting our fire back, and starting to make big leaps forward into a new vision of our future for the first time in quite a while. But first, in order to do that, we have to participate in a sort of rebirth process that's happening right now. And we can know what to expect by looking specifically at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is happening again in that first degree of the zodiac. That alignment is going to become very powerful through 2025. And again, it becomes exact in February of next year. And that alignment, I believe, is what is going to flavor and characterize the year ahead more profoundly than anything else that's happening in the sky. I want to show you what this looks like and the timeline of it all on the zodiac wheel, because I think that's going to really give you some imagery that will help you understand what's going on and why life may feel the way it feels in certain respects at this moment in time. There you go. All right, so this is the zodiac wheel we're looking at here. And here is 0 degrees Aries. Again, that is the seminal point of our entire zodiac wheel here. And this is the location of Saturn here in Pisces as of January 1st. And here is the location of Neptune as of January 1st. And I'm going to kind of zoom through the months ahead, and you're going to see what happens as Saturn, which is the faster moving planet, is going to creep up on Neptune here and then eventually pass it as we get into next year. So here, as we're into April and May, Neptune has moved into Aries. Then in May, June will move into Aries. And these planets don't exactly align, although they get really, really close. They're at 1 degree and some change, but still a little bit of a distance apart. And the faster moving planet Saturn is still behind Neptune there. And they're very close in August. Then both planets are going retrograde. They're going to go back into Pisces for some measure of time. And then in February of next year, they're both going to align here. Let's go back to the perfect date. I want you to see how they're meeting here in 0 degrees. This is when the faster moving planet Saturn overtakes Neptune and moves past it. And then as we get into March and April and the later months of next year, Saturn really starts gaining some distance and moving away from Neptune. I think visualizing what's happening there between those two planets is going to help you appreciate the meaning of what is happening in your life right now and in our global communities right now. These two planets, if we can think about them as a new moon, right? Like the alignment being similar to a new moon. A new moon is what happens every month when the sun and moon come into an exact alignment. The moon, which is the faster moving planet, is kind of chasing and creeping up on the sun, and there will be an exact alignment, and then the moon moves away from the sun again, just as we saw Saturn and Neptune doing. But as the moon gets increasingly close to the sun, the moon also gets increasingly dark, and it reflects less and less light until finally it can't be seen at all. And this dark moon phase of the process symbolizes the end of the old cycle. The receding into darkness also symbolizes our need to withdraw for a while and go within and surrender and even maybe let go of what was started in that cycle so that we can begin anew. Then in complete darkness, the sun and moon come into perfect alignment, but we don't see it because the moon is still totally dark in the sky. So a rebirth is happening at that moment in time, but there is no visible evidence of it. And then just a few days later, the moon begins to appear in the sky again, gaining more and more light as it begins its new journey or its new revolution around the sky. While the new moon, that true alignment between the sun and moon, is just a momentary turning point, I want you to appreciate that the moon, as it's ending an old cycle and starting a new one, is completely dark for several days. This happens once a month. So in a 28-day cycle, the moon is completely dark for several days. So extrapolate this onto a 36-year cycle, because it takes Saturn and Neptune 36 years to go from one alignment to the next alignment or conjunction. That means the dark period, if we can call it that, is several years long, because this is a 36-year cycle as compared to a 28-day cycle. So our entry into darkness and personal withdrawal and depletion and death and decay and surrendering anything that served its maximum purpose, this lasts not a few days in a 36-year cycle, but a few years. And that's what we've been going through. And it has a brilliant purpose, but it's not easy to cope with, especially if we don't know what's going on. I've talked to so many people who are dealing with a sense of despair because they felt dark, they felt stuck in this dark part of the cycle for several years now, and it's creating some distress that they're never going to feel better, that they're never going to have energy to do things again, that they're never going to have fun or feel excited again. And I admit this is a really trying and long process, not only because of the withdrawn, heavy, and dark quality it brings, but again, because of the length of time we have to go through that. Without astrology, we might be asking, what the hell is happening right now? But with astrology, we know what's happening right now, and we can look at that darkness and experience the heaviness of the end of that 30-year cycle without as much fear. Believe it or not, there is some sensibility and some order to everything that's happening right now. Everything is happening in perfect timing in your life. And signs of newness or visions of a new future or life you want to begin aiming for are going to start happening, I think, even this year, but especially as we get into next year when that new cycle gets underway. And also because both of those planets are moving into Aries, which is a fiery sign and has a lot of life, I think that we're going to find ourselves kind of picking ourselves up by the bootstraps this year and feeling a little bit more empowered and invigorated and excited about the future, at least more so than we've felt lately. Again, that might come on the tail end of some sort of crisis or some need to let go of something that's not working for us anymore. Many of us will just need to create space in our lives where we can birth something new. And so this video, we're going to go through the global themes, and at the end, I'm going to give you some tips on making all of this information very personally relevant to you throughout the year ahead. Taking all I've said into account, the writing is on the proverbial wall that this Saturn-Neptune conjunction will bring us the death of an old order. And it will also bring the envisionment and ultimately the establishment of a new one. To understand how that's going to show up, what it means when Saturn and Neptune align, we first have to know how those planets manifest individually and what significance they have in our astrological model. To understand that, I want to start with Saturn and say that Saturn is the furthest planet in the sky that can be seen with the naked eye. So in our system, Saturn represents the boundary of the human experience. For millennia, humans thought that's where existence ended, at Saturn. And so in that way, Saturn represents this boundary or limit, and most of Saturn's significations relate to the fact that it has that limit and is kind of like the fence, right, of our known world or our supposed reality, because it is what we can see and experience. Saturn also appears in the sky as kind of like a dusky or brown color. It is like a very dim looking planet, and that also lends itself to some of its meanings. So I want to look at a slide here. So in astrology, Saturn signifies physical matter and consensus reality as we understand it. Saturn represents solid physical structures, land, rock, buildings, bridges. Saturn represents boundaries, limits, barriers between one thing and other things. The notion of separateness or isolation as an individual, right? Like in our psyches, we actually imagine that we are totally separate and isolated from the rest of life. That is a Saturn construct in our minds. Saturn represents order as well. It represents systems, standards, regulation, governments, agencies, authority figures. Saturn is all about materiality and practicality. Saturn it's the science, it's the hard facts, it's the numbers, it's anything measurable and determinable. Saturn represents human hardship, labor, and mastery of skills or of knowledge. in terms of just adjectives or characteristics, Saturn is cautious, it's contracting, it's rigid, it's heavy, traditional, old, and conservative. And it was only a short time ago that humans began discovering that so much more lies beyond Saturn. There is so much expanse and existence beyond what the human eye can see. The discovery of planets beyond Saturn, which includes Neptune, the other important planet we're talking about in this video, was more profound than I think we understand it today, because it is a given that we understand the vastness of space. But back when those planets were first discovered beyond Saturn, there was a moment in time where suddenly the universe was just exponentially more massive than we'd known it to be. And that really rocked humans to the core, because we realized that there is so much more that exists to life and in creation than we ever knew of. And that has some relation to Neptune's meaning in astrology. Neptune represents the vastness of the all. It is the everything. It is the divine. It includes everything that is beyond our ability to easily grasp or comprehend it humans, because it's beyond our senses. Let's look at Neptune's significations like we did for Saturn here. In astrology, Neptune represents non-physical and non-separate, right? So we already see a big difference here between Saturn and Neptune. Saturn is physical and it's separate. Neptune is non-physical and non-separate. Again, Neptune is the all, the vastness, boundarylessness. Neptune is eroding. It fogs things. It dissolves the boundaries and limits that Saturn puts in place. Neptune often feels more chaotic, whereas Saturn is all about order. Neptune is chaos. It is what we can't easily put order to, what is beyond our observation. It is beyond measurement. It is perhaps beyond our understanding in some way as humans. Neptune is intangible reality, right? So there are intangible aspects of life that are real, but again, it's not a scientific sort of part of life. Here we're talking about creativity and emotion and inspiration, intuition, spirituality, faith, right? Neptune relates to these more intangible aspects of human life. Neptune signifies the ocean, water, rivers, and even water as it appears in the air as mist or fog. Neptune represents the collective consciousness or the divine whole, right? Saturn was, me, I am an individual, I'm separate. Neptune says, no, we are a collective and we are all a web or network of life. Neptune represents sympathy, compassion, and feelings that reflect our knowing that we are connected to all the rest of life. In terms of adjectives or characteristics, Neptune is artistic, visionary, mystical, escaping, it's dreamy, it's surrender, and it's free floating. You might by now be noticing that in many ways, Saturn and Neptune represent opposite ends of certain polarities, and they have many opposite meanings. And it's interesting to see throughout history the types of events that coincide with Saturn and Neptune alignments. Often, Saturn is trying to help us make sense or give order to things that were not previously understood or that have been disorganized, unseen, or even hidden. And on the other hand, Neptune works like a sort of tidal wave that comes over land, it comes over structures, systems, order, and the governance that we've previously put into place. And that tidal wave sort of washes over the fabric of our lives. And as it recedes, we may find that there are some things that have been washed away. And that actually serves a positive purpose because it gives us a chance to rebuild something new, specifically something that's more temporally relevant to our needs at this time that didn't exist before. I've grouped the ways that these planets work together into 6 categories of events. And these are the manifestations of a Saturn-Neptune alignment that we're going to be watching for in the year ahead and in 2026 as well. These are things that you may notice we are already experiencing, whether you've experienced any of these in your own life or whether you're seeing these things play out in your environment or you're hearing them on the news. There's a reason for that. Saturn and Neptune have been working towards this conjunction for several years now. They've been in the same sign since 2023. And so all of these things will likely sound very familiar to you. And from here on, you'll know exactly why. And you'll also see that these things are not as scary as they may seem, though they may be heartbreaking or challenging in some instances. Saturn and Neptune have been in this dark moon phase or this closing part of their cycle for several years now. And in 2025, it's likely that many of these themes will even intensify as the planets come toward an exact alignment, and that exact alignment signifies the birth of a new 36 years of human development. We really are at the dawn of a new era this year, as these planets come within just 1 degree of that exact alignment, and then they make that exact alignment, as I showed you, in February of 2026. The first category of events that we often see with this alignment are ecological issues. They're always front and center when Saturn and Neptune form a conjunction. Most commonly, this appears as very wild weather patterns, all sorts of natural disasters, major storms, concerns about climate change and coastal erosion, as well as pollution issues and other environmental concerns. Beyond the hardship and heartache that can be caused by these sorts of concerns or events in our environment, Saturn-Neptune alignments also create a window of time during which we're given the motivation and the opportunity to create solutions to these problems. I think we're going to be seeing the adoption of new eco-conscious regulations. We might see the invention of new technology that's going to help clean our air and ocean. And there will be new strategies and coalitions for protecting our Earth. And you may know that at some point in time, we were concerned about holes in our ozone layer, and those have started to heal themselves as we have changed our use of aerosols and made other lifestyle changes. So I don't think we should feel that all hope is lost. However, we have to be really realistic about what's happening and make some effort, each of us personally, towards making this world a better place and leaving it for future generations in as good of a shape as we possibly can at this point. I mean, we're in January and we've already seen completely devastating fires in California. And not too long ago, we saw a hurricane that caused devastation in North Carolina in an extremely unordinary and unpredictable way. But my US listeners can't forget that this was the case across the world. Just recently, we had wildfires raging across Portugal, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile. We also had massive flooding and storms last year in Argentina, in Dubai, Brazil, China, the Philippines, Greece, the Czech Republic, Vietnam, Cuba, Spain, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Romania. There's more. And unfortunately, this could be the tip of the iceberg for us this year. There may be more dramatic changes in land and in our environment and in our coastlines that we'll deal with over the next few years. However, I think there is some golden opportunity that we can reach for as all of these things are happening. I think it might help you find some comfort if we go back and are able to demonstrate that this has happened before. This is no surprise. These sort of events happen every time Neptune and Saturn come into a strong alignment. I pulled out some examples from the very last alignment, which was 1989. In that year, Hurricane Hugo hit South Carolina. That was also a severely active typhoon season with 32 tropical storms, 20 typhoons, and 5 super typhoons. There was an earthquake that hit the San Francisco Bay Area that year. There was a tornado outbreak that affected a lot of southern and eastern states in the US and Canada as well. We also had extreme coronal mass ejections and geomagnetic storms that caused mass communication and power blackouts and auroras as far south as Texas. And this might sound familiar given that we've seen the northern lights very far south in the United States recently. This was also the highest mean sea level pressure to date recorded in the US, and we had a close call with an asteroid that year too. I also spoke to contamination and toxicity and pollution issues that often come to the forefront with these planets aligned. And here are some past examples of that. Back in 52 and 53, when these planets aligned, we had a chemical company up in New York that had been dumping tens of thousands of tons of toxic chemicals into a canal. And that was the year that not only came to the forefront of our awarenesses, but the chemical companies stopped that dumping that year. This is also the time frame when the Camp Lejeune drinking water contamination began. And interestingly enough, that contamination ended around the following Saturn and Neptune alignment. In 1970, when those planets were at their opposition, air and water pollution issues became front and center in the awareness of the public, and the Environmental Protection Agency was first created. And then at the last alignment in 89, we had an oil tanker spill, almost 250,000 barrels of oil into the Prince William Sound. And around this time is when the EPA began publicly reporting data on toxical chemical releases. There was a lot of pollution transparency that began at that time. And we quit using asbestos, and we also quit using chlorofluorocarbons around that same period. I think that there are many opportunities that will lie beyond our experience of what's happening. I think our chance to replace fossil fuels altogether is much closer than we think based on the astrology of the next few years. And that's a really amazing thing. The next category of events that often happen with Saturn aligned with Neptune are new awarenesses of human health problems, many of which may relate to contamination of our bodies in ways that we weren't aware of before. And that can give way to increased medical knowledge, testing of products, regulation, and attempts to purify not just our environment, as we've already seen, but the food and the water and the drugs and the products that we expose our bodies to. And this also often results in far-reaching medical advances and changes in our healthcare systems. As I showed you in the slides we looked at earlier, Saturn represents all sorts of boundaries, and Neptune tends to dissolve things. So even the boundaries of our physical bodies seem to become more porous when these planets are aligned, and we may become more susceptible to invasion by diseases, by flus, by cold. And it's as though our natural defense systems weaken when these planets come into an alignment. And so it goes without saying that this year is an incredibly important time to stay on the offense and to pay attention to what you're consuming and the environments you're putting yourself in. Aim to make very wise decision about the food you eat, about the supplements you take, and exercise, stretch, do everything that you can to boost your holistic well-being during this period. This alignment is really going to ask us to rise to the occasion and better test and understand and manage prescription drugs, even recreational drugs, vaccines, alcohol, psychedelics, chemicals that are in the products that we put on our body, the fragrance that we might inhale from candles, so on and so forth. It just comes as no surprise that some of these topics have already become very prevalent in our media over the past couple of years, especially at the latter portion of last year when these planets started to really come closer into strong activation range. This conjunction, as I mentioned before, can also signal groundbreaking advances in medicine and in healthcare and our understanding of what ails us, which gives us an opportunity to live longer, live healthier, and live more intentionally. I think we're going to see groundbreaking solutions to chronic illnesses, autoimmune problems, possibly even cancer. I foresee that with Neptune often being linked to music in astrology, sound waves and the use of music or other vibration to cure these types of illnesses might be just around the corner. Let's take a look at a few slides and see how this has shown up during past Saturn-Neptune alignments. In 1952 and 53, when these planets were aligned, we discovered the double helix structure of DNA. This was also when doctors first separated Siamese twins. This was the first sex reassignment surgery. This was also the first ever organ transplant. And I think all of these are just mind-blowing examples of how Saturn and Neptune come together, where boundaries are created where there was none before, or boundaries that previously existed get washed away or dissolved. In 1989, at the last Saturn-Neptune alignment, we had the first living donor liver transplant. We had human skin grown in a lab for the first time that could be used for burn patients. We had the Human Genome Mapping Project funded. Also, this was when cold fusion was achieved by electrochemists, which is a way of potentially creating clean energy. So while we're having a lot of talk about chronic disease and health problems and immunity and viruses and the safety of vaccines and food additives, these Saturn-Neptune alignments are really powerful in terms of helping us break through some of those problems. The next theme that I want to talk about with the Saturn-Neptune alignments are we often see when these planets are conjoined the fall of old paradigms of leaderships. We see the breaking apart of existing political unions and international organizations. We see the removal of territorial boundaries and the creation of new ones. And all of these events give way to the renegotiation of borders, to the creation of new unions, new agreements, and new governments. Saturn-Neptune alignments are a time where dictatorships and strong-arm forms of government are likely to fall. And sometimes that happens because of the death of an important leader. Other times it happens because of civil unrest or rebellion or revolutions. Saturn and Neptune's tendency to reconfigure national and territorial boundaries is normally preceded by increased infighting and hostility in certain countries alone, as well as hostility between nations. We've already seen that. And now we can understand why. This is just a time where all of these things come up for potential review and revision. And along with the fall of existing borders and unions and governments and leadership paradigms, we can also expect new movements and alliances and territorial groupings to be established. Another important topic at this time will be our approach to foreign policy. When is one country's involvement in matters outside of its borders necessary or even productive? When Saturn conjoins Neptune, we're often forced to deal with moral and philosophical and ethical questions surrounding appropriate boundaries. Not only will this be a sticking point in our own lives, right, where we are trying to get a better grasp on when is it appropriate when I concern myself with the affairs of another person or other people? When is my intervention actually helpful versus when do I need to stay in my own lane? And this is going to happen in our societies as well. And there will be many questions in terms of international involvement and a possible renegotiation of national, international, and even maritime boundaries. Issues of border crossing are always prominent with Saturn and Neptune aligned, whether that's the movement of humans across borders and immigration, or whether we're talking about the movement of goods or even ideologies or anything across borders and waterways. Immigration and trade come up like clockwork, and again, that should be no surprise at this time. Let's look at a few slides to help you see how this has shown up with every Saturn and Neptune alignment in the past. In 1917, this is when the US joined the Allied powers and declared war on Germany, entering World War I. This is also when the United States purchased the Virgin Islands, right? So we are changing what territory belongs to the United States. This is also when Puerto Ricans gained US citizenship. This is when the US passed the Immigration Act of 1917. This is when the United States and Mexico renewed their diplomatic relationship. This is also when there was a Russian Revolution, and also when Mexico adopted a new constitution. Then at the alignment of 52 and 53, we had the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. No surprise, we saw it at the last conjunction. This is also when Joseph Stalin died and represented the end of Stalinism. Also, King George died and Queen Elizabeth II was coronated, and she would become the longest reigning, longest living British monarch. Also, the Egyptian government was overthrown and monarchy was abolished, land was redistributed, and politicians were tried for corruption. The Iranian government was overthrown at that alignment, and also the World War II peace treaty took effect during those years. 1989, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. We had the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement, the dismantling of apartheid, which was a system of institutional racial segregation in South Africa. We had the Tiananmen Square massacre incident after martial law was declared in Beijing and the citizens' push for democracy and reform was unfortunately defeated at that time. We also had Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, die during that last alignment, and he was one of the world's longest reigning monarchs. So really, it should come as no surprise that we're seeing so many changes in government and leadership across the world. We are talking about immigration, we are talking about trade, and I think there are going to be big things that come about in all of those categories of news this year. There are other ways that non-physical limitations can be created or dissolved when these planets come into an alignment. It's a time when race and gender-related barriers always come into focus. It's also a time when human advancements allow us to reach entirely new levels of connectedness across the world. In 1917, the Supreme Court in the US struck down a city ordinance requiring segregation. In 1952 and 53, we had the first ever US coast-to-coast telecast. We had the PGA voting to admit Black golfers to compete in PGA competitions. We had the first US national monument dedicated to a Black American. We had the first expedition to Mount Everest. the first passenger flight over the North Pole. Then at the last alignment, the World Wide Web was invented for sharing information between computers across the world. We had the first satellite of the Global Positioning System launched into orbit. This created GPS. We had the first female Episcopal bishop. We had the first African American to head a major sports league. And at that year, Denmark became the first country to legalize same-sex marriage. If we compare and contrast these last two sets of slides, you're going to notice, as I said before, that Saturn and Neptune coming together can work in two nearly opposite ways. New barriers can be constructed, preventing fluidity of movement between things, or between people, or between countries, or between genders. At the same time, boundaries that previously existed can also come down. So we're going to see a lot of that, and these types of conversations are going to be very prevalent in the year ahead. The next category of events that often happen with these planets aligned is a confrontation with illusion, with hypocrisy, deception, and manipulated appearances that hide things from us. And as these planets come into an alignment, there's often some sense of confusion as to what is real. This is a theme that I brought up several months ago in our newsletters. If you follow me, you might remember that the newsletter that went out on October 1st said, "Remain conscious of the unseen shadow elements of everything. We're collectively going below the surface and looking behind the curtain right now." Not coincidentally, it was at that same moment in time where this push for exposure seemed to become so prevalent. In the United States, we've had countless hearings before Congress on all sorts of topics, ranging from aliens to the origin of COVID to the safety of COVID vaccines and other vaccines, food additives, and so forth. We're also seeing a lot of allegations in terms of government collusion, leadership negligence, and so many other topics that are very par for the course when Saturn and Neptune are aligned. It's really normal when these planets come together that we tend to question what government agencies know, what they're hiding from us, how they operate, how they might be overreaching, and whether their purposes are really pure. We're asking ourselves, who is there that is really serving us and is really loyal to positive purposes and productive developments for their communities at this time? And I want to say something about that. I think as far apart as our political differences might make us right now, consider just for a moment whether we are really all in the same boat. The Saturn-Neptune alignment suggests that every single one of us is dealing with some sort of loss of clarity or trust at this time. And this inevitably leads to a propensity for othering. Many people feel like it's the others or the people who have a different belief about what's going on that are the ones who are living under some veil of illusion. But strangely, both groups of people feel the same way about one another. So we're all in the same boat. And if we also take on board all that AI is starting to do at this point, how we can see images or videos or hear things that aren't even real, we might start to understand why every single person might feel in some way that they're living a strange dream and don't really know what to believe and what not to believe. So can we at least try a little harder to love one another through this moment in time where things tend to be unclear? No one really knows everything that's going on. No one knows all of the truth. We all have some level of disorientation and disillusionment about what's happening in our world right now. I can at least say that the mental and emotional toll of all of this has been real in my own life. But as I've been showing, valuable opportunities lie below the surface of what's happening. It is this very same sense of disillusionment and confusion that's required to instigate a deeper search for truth. And we're only at the beginning of what I think will be large scale investigations about the communities we live in, the leadership that we've elected into power or that have come into power through birth. And I think that there will be rebellions potentially, or ways of pushing back against ways that the truth has been hidden from us. We're really going to be witnessing this in next year, a push to purify our political atmosphere and our information networks as well. The next category of themes and events that often come up with Saturn and Neptune aligned is that we somehow become forced to contend with the less visible and less quantifiable aspects of the human experience. For instance, mental and emotional health issues become pervasive with this alignment, as do spiritual issues, and we may often become more aware of a sense of spiritual vacancy or a loss of a clear sense of deeper meaning and purpose in our lives. And we may be looking at the broader context of life or our own personal lifestyle and trying to figure out what is falling short for us. We might even take issue with particular religious institutions and how those are functioning. We may question whether the very structures that are meant to support our spiritual connection and provide us with hope and faith are as helpful as we need them to be, whether they are as relevant as we need them to be at this particular moment in evolution. And I want to look at a few alignments that show how this has happened in history. In terms of revelations or acknowledgement of what was previously unseen, in 1917, we had psychiatrists recognizing the condition and effects of what we now call shell shock. In 52 and 53, Einstein announced the revised unified field theory. And in fact, it was at a previous alignment, the opposition of Saturn and Neptune, when quantum entanglement was first introduced. Also in 52-53, we had the very first publication of the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which categorized mental disorders. At that time, we also had the intensification of the Cold War and the US fear and focused on communist threat. And these are all aspects of life that are very real, but are happening invisibly. In terms of religious questions and controversies, we had that at the last alignment of the planets in 89, when we had scandals involving multiple televangelists, including Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart. There was also a massive demonstration against a Catholic archdiocese on the basis of their stance on AIDS education, gay rights, and abortion rights as well. We're already seeing this at the current time. I hadn't heard much about it, but there are supposedly some church leaders down in Texas that are being removed or challenged based on sexual and physical abuse allegations. And one of these is, in fact, the founder of one of the largest megachurches in the United States. At times like these, there is a widespread feeling of fatigue and exhaustion and even pessimism that can surface, whether that's on account of things that are happening or for no reason at all. Saturn-Neptune alignments do tend to coincide with this feeling of funk or apathy, and I know I've been feeling that myself for no reason in particular. But that becomes even worse if we're dealing with failures of leadership, of government. We might even revisit past grief of our own or witness mass tragedies as the types of storms and natural disasters come about as a result of this alignment. Saturn is the planet that symbolizes the sharp contours and boundaries of the self, and Neptune blurs that boundary. And individuals tend to become more sensitive, but to the subtle and very real connection to everything else that is going on in the world. So if you've been experiencing some sense of heaviness that you just can't pinpoint, remember what we've talked about here and give yourself a lot of grace in consideration of everything that is happening right now and of your own sensitivity to the collective consciousness and the entire web of life. My goal in pointing all of this out is not only helping make sense of what we might be feeling right now, but also offering some reassurance and noting that all of these experiences are going to give way to growth. They are going to increase our sense of humanity and help remind us about the vulnerability and absolute preciousness of life. As these planets form an alignment every 36 years, it tends to instigate events that both shake our faith, but reawaken it as well. And these are, in a sense, the labor pains that are ultimately going to birth some new level of awareness and compassion in every single one of us. We're also being pushed to put mental health, emotional health, and our spiritual fulfillment at the very top of our priority list right now. We're being empowered to be part of the practical solutions and the healing strategies that need to be born at this time. And I have some amazing examples of how that has happened at past alignments. Looking at prior Saturn-Neptune conjunction dates, I see all kinds of spiritual and humanitarian events. In 1882, the Knights of Columbus was founded. In 1917, we had the appearance of the Virgin Mary to children in Fatima, and people later gathered to see what we call the miracle of the sun, according to her prophecy when she appeared to those children. We had the formation of the Lions Club International, the founding of Kiwanis International, the American Red Cross becoming the prominent relief organization for World War I. At the alignment of 1952 and 53, we had the creation of UNICEF, the signing of the Refugee Act into law in the United States. Scientology was founded. Then we had the Peaceful Revolution of 1989 at the next alignment. And this is where 2 million people from various countries joined hands to form a human chain over 300 miles long in peaceful protest of Soviet occupation. We also had the founding of the American Psychological Society and the emergence of positive psychology. And this is a concept in which we started to recognize psychological well-being as important. And this emphasized purpose, growth, positive relationships as key components of mental health. I think in the near future, we're going to begin celebrating the fact that whatever disenchantment we may feel with life at this moment in time, if we experience a loss of faith or a feeling of purposelessness, those very feelings are what may give way to a re-envisionment of the way we live our lives, and where we start elevating these unseen aspects of life that give us purpose and meaning. And we have breakthroughs in terms of really understanding the importance of mental health, spiritual fulfillment. We're able to deal with and recognize what trauma and grief have done to us. And we even are able to form new ways of uplifting one another, whether that is through the creation of new humanitarian organizations, the establishment of new religions or faith systems, egalitarian efforts, as have happened with past alignments. And this is a time where displays of great compassion and personal sacrifice will really begin happening. 2025 and 2026 are really a powerful window of time for any of you involved in therapy or healing practices, for anyone who is engaged in environmental work of some sort, or maybe you are interested in health, the medical industry, politics, activism, journalism, or any of these subject areas that we've covered so far. This is the time when so many of us are going to feel called to make changes in our personal lives and even in our careers in ways that allow us to begin extending our hearts and our gifts to other people. Some of you may feel called to leadership at this time. Some of you may offer your skills to your community, whether that's by working as a mentor or a volunteer or an activist of some type. And if you're beginning to feel that way, but it's very vague at this point and you are not really sure what to do, that's okay. You're in the right place. We are still at the tail end of this dark moon phase. And as these planets begin forming that very precise alignment where we are turning the corner and giving birth to something new, you're going to start knowing what steps to take, and your intuition is going to help you put one foot in front of the other and begin moving in the right direction. I realize that our discussion has been very high level and global, and we are kind of looking at the world from a bird's eye view and discussing what's happening. And as far as your personal experience goes, I have some ideas to keep in mind in the year ahead. First, it's very common when these planets align that things feel energetically heavy. And so you might in this year still be fluctuating between periods of inspiration and periods of discouragement. You might at times find yourself able to exert great effort and get a lot of things done, but then have other segments of time where you are kind of in avoidance mode or passively resisting any sense of responsibility. Sometimes you might feel incredibly hopeful, and other times you might feel like your efforts are futile or absolutely pointless. I've been going back and forth between these ranges of inner experience in the past couple of years, and so I really do understand. A lot of people are describing to me what I would call passive resistance, where in their mind, they really want to accomplish things or start something new, but they really can't bring themselves or have the motivation to take action. And it's important to remember we're at the tail end of a very large cycle. We have to be careful how much we expect of ourselves in terms of exertion and taking initiative. If we go back and think about what happens at the dark moon, we're actually asked to withdraw and to rest. And so allow yourself to do that when your body is telling you it's needed. Also, don't beat yourself up when you're discouraged. The goal here during this alignment, I feel, is for humans to start moving from a more industrial or robotic idea of productivity to one of self-love. How can you love yourself into a better and more meaningful routine this year? The rarity of the astrology of this decade reflects a very important truth, and that is the last few years are not comparable to anything you've felt or experienced before or that you will ever experience again. So if we can just lean into this moment with a little bit less fear, we can remember everything we've talked about in this video in terms of what we're seeing right now is normal. Let's be okay with that. Let's do what we can. Let us enjoy productivity when it's available without using a good day as a benchmark to determine whether the next day is also valuable. The second personal tip I want to give you is to note that Neptune may wash away your certainty or sense of security about an aspect of your life this year. If you feel ambivalence or you're unable to clearly define your aims in the year ahead, that's okay. Treat even confusion as a valuable phase of your journey. When our certainty and our assumptions about ourselves and our journey are removed, we're given a chance to be more creative about envisioning what we want for our future. In the meantime, the most important thing is to avoid psyching ourselves out, worrying that the way things are right now is the way it's going to be forever. My final tip is to treat the year ahead as a year-long transition from a dark moon to a new moon. When the moon is dark, we have to go into surrender mode. You may sense that you need to let go of something important in your life this year. It might even be something that you've invested a lot of effort into in the past. That's okay. Saturn often brings us a bit of testing, and this process is all about helping us determine whether some dream or situation in our lives, whether some job, relationship, or commitment has fully served its purpose and now needs to be released. This year really asks us for non-attachment. Understand that letting go of something does not mean our efforts are lost. In fact, it means that your efforts towards whatever you're letting go of were so effective that they brought you to this place where a new dream or vision of your future is needed to carry you forward. And if during that time you're faced with the pain of letting something very dear to you go, or if you've had to do so recently, remember that this time is very beneficial and that in any way that we're clearing space in our life, something new will appear. Every single one of us are on the threshold of something totally new right now. This year will allow us to dream of various new ways to give form to these visions. And if we're on the precipice of beginning a new 36-year journey, for many of us, that might be the rest of our lives. We're going to take the rest of our lives, or at least the next 3.5 decades, to chase after this new vision. And so I think the process of letting go and surrender and re-envisionment of something new is not something that we can approach carelessly. We have to remember this is a really big deal, and it's a moment in time where we are seeding amazing new possibilities for ourselves and for humanity as a whole. If you're like me, you're really ready to get your spunk back, your fire back, and I think we're standing on the brink of a moment in time when our zest and enthusiasm for life is going to start making a big comeback. And we need to be patient as we turn this corner this and next year. If you haven't purchased my guidebook, which I spoke about at the beginning of this video, those materials were written to guide you through the year ahead step by step. Not every month or week this year is created equally. As I said, we're going to kind of fluctuate between the old and the new this year. And I think the timeline that's written in that guidebook will help you do so and kind of stay in sync with the rhythm of life. Also, that guidebook has a horoscope written for you that will help you see how this Saturn and Neptune alignment will impact your life specifically. These guidebooks are $35, and for every person who orders one of the guidebooks, feel free to email me and tell me the rising sign of someone else in your life, and we will give a free gift of that guidebook to them as well. So it's really two for the price of one. I'm going to pull up here a copy of the Aries Rising guidebook to just give everyone a sneak peek of what it looks like. The guidebooks are about 30 pages, and in the first few pages, I cover a little bit of the information that we did here, and I have some of these themes that we discussed today and the tips on personal application. After that, I go into the horoscope for your particular rising sign. And there are 3 pages of horoscope there, followed by a timeline of the year. And this timeline goes through the various segments of the year and tells you the energies that are in play in those dates. There's an oracle message, and then also a calendar that shows the buildup and fluctuating energies as they become a little bit more intense and then die away during particular segments of the year. Before I go, I just want to wish all of you peace this year. I'm always here if anyone wants to book a one-on-one reading. That's an even better way to really understand how the astrology of this moment in time is aligning with your natal chart, what you can expect to experience and feel, but also the deeper meaning of what's happening and all of the amazing opportunities that lie below the surface of the events and situations that are popping up in your life in the year ahead. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.